Welcome to Not Two Reads, an audio library of revolutionary texts. Letter entitled Racial and Political Persecution of Grassroots Black Political Leaders and Activists by Kevin Rashid Johnson. Two, Director, Department of Homeland Security and Staff. Director, Office of National Intelligence and Staff. Director, Central Intelligence Agency and Staff. Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation and Staff. Commonwealth Attorney Adrian Collins, Wise County, Virginia. Virginia Department of Corrections. Director and Deputy Director. Inspector General and Staff. Publication Review Committee. Red Onion State Prison. Warden and Assistant Warden, Investigator and Intelligence Office Staff, Security Chief, Mailroom Staff, Virginia Attorney General and Staff. From Kevin Rashid Johnson, Minister of Defense, New Afrikan Black Panther Party, White Panther Organization. Date, June 3, 2008. Racial and Political Persecution of Grassroots Black Political Leaders and Activists. As many of you are certainly aware, America's intelligence and executive policing agencies, federal, state, and local, have a sordid legacy of persecuting and targeting grassroots Black political leaders and activists for destruction. The spectrum of methods applied have ranged from slander, false character and image depictions and attacks, spread through and by government agents and friendly media assets, to false and malicious criminal arrests and prosecutions, to violence and outright murder. Such designs come as no surprise in a country that was built upon history's first race-based and most brutal system of enslavement and native genocide and land theft. The very place where the false concept of race and attendant racism, white racial supremacy, was created. Since chattel slavery, when American society was artificially divided along politically created racial lines, it has been a central policy to prevent blacks from organizing independent political institutions and parties. Until just a few decades ago, this policy included our systematic exclusion from participating as genuine citizens in electoral politics. Indeed, America's dual-party system evolved from the struggle to keep blacks enslaved and out of the political sphere, contrary to deceptive official claims that this system arose as an expression of respect for diverse political views and representatives. It is also telling that many of the historical figures projected today as American heroes and founding fathers embraced bigoted views and practiced genocidal and criminal policies that would have made even the most vicious German Nazi blush. Let's not forget that the Central Intelligence Agency, in its formative years, absorbed and employed many of the Nazis' worst war criminals as agents, assets, and advisors. Indeed, President George W. Bush's grandfather was Hitler's chief American financier during World War II, and ended in having his Union Banking Corporation confiscated under the Trading with the Enemies Act in October 1942 by the Roosevelt administration. Since U.S. executive policies of targeting non-embedded black politicos for destruction were exposed in the 1970s, culminating in several congressional investigations and reports, efforts have been made to gloss over this history and to rehabilitate the images of these agencies, particularly through glamorized images and cultural fantasies projected of American police and intelligence agencies via the vast entertainment information media. However, behind this iron curtain of deception, official designs have not changed. A fact that I bear witness to because I have been and am a target of them, which is the basis of this letter. I have been incarcerated since 1990 and have experienced firsthand the brutal reality of American prisons. A system that, as the American Civil Liberties Union has acknowledged, it is more and more, quote, dedicated to the African American community, end quote, and the underlying anti-black orientation of this system, which cannot be honestly denied. For many years, I have been reporting and pursuing public exposure and redress of the brutality, torture, and abuses occurring inside these institutions, and have supported and co-founded several groups and organizations that also pursue these ends. In 2005, I co-founded the new Afrikan Black Panther Party / White Panther Organization, a nonviolent, legal, and above-ground party whose focus is on promoting the interests and human rights, in strictly legal forms, of sectors of the U.S. population whose needs and interests are ignored, and who are not represented by the established political economic system, especially poor, working class, and imprisoned blacks. The NABPP-WPO specifically opposes criminal activities, street gang mentalities and behaviors, violence, except in the extremes of self-defense, all forms of discrimination, racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, national, etc., and all forms of oppression. We also promote the right to free, open, and honest speech. Our orientation, ideologies, and views have been and are elaborated in our various periodicals and publications, many of them I authored. Because U.S. social policies are not oriented towards serving or promoting the needs, interests, rights, and benefits of poor, working class, and ethnic people, while our party's orientation specifically is, we are likely viewed as promoting views unpopular with and to the status quo. As a result of this in general, and my role in these efforts in particular, I have been and am targeted with those repressive methods reserved in America for independent black leaders and activists. One typical form that this targeting has taken is my being falsely profiled by this prison as the leader of a criminal street gang or security threat group, STG, namely the NABPP-WPO. This tactic of stigmatizing and consequently repressing black political groups is certainly not new or unique, and harkens back to policies applied by U.S. officials during periods when official racism was less veiled. As Associate U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black pointed out, quote, "History should teach us that minority parties and groups which advocate extremely unpopular social or governmental innovations will always be typed as criminal gangs, and attempts will always be made to drive them out," end quote. So much for the facial validity of STG profilings. I have persisted in seeking an explanation from this Prisons and Prison Systems Administration as to what the NABPP-WPO has done or promotes that qualifies us for STG classification, besides the obvious reasons of their own racial and political intolerance. To date, my inquiries have been evaded, and I am told that I cannot formally grieve the matter through the established grievance procedures. It is of course a crime to be a member of, to recruit for, or act in furtherance of the goals of a criminal street gang. The criteria of what constitutes a criminal street gang is defined by law. Incidentally, I might add, street gang implies groupings of people of color, since it is generally recognized that, since the 1970s, urban is basically synonymous in America with the black population, over 90% of which lives in urban communities. Yet another legal embodiment of the race factor, targeted at people of color selectively. Moreover, to falsely impute criminal activities to one not duly convicted is per se defamation and slander, and one is presumed innocent of crimes that they have not been thus convicted of. This entire gang profiling of me and the NABPP-WPO here has been at the instigation of this prison's near exclusively white staff and investigator, and admittedly conveyed to federal intelligence agencies, who come from local, rural, race-segregated communities of mountainous southwestern Virginia and eastern Kentucky and Tennessee, who harbor socially conditioned and culturally ingrained insensitivities towards and genuine ignorance of the views, values, history, and culture of urban people of color. Typical of the tendency of racists to stereotype groups of people, these officials make no distinctions between black political organizations and indeed declare that, quote, all black groups that promote dissent, end quote, fit their criteria of a gang or STG, as does any group or organization that criticizes government and prison practices and policies. Further, they lump together every group that has ever used the Black Panther name, characterizing them all generically as the Black Panther Group or Black Panther Gang. Although, there have been a great number of different organizations that have used the Black Panther name or logo, none of which is the NABPP-WPO affiliated with. In fact, initially they claimed the NABPP, WPO, and the new Black Panther Party, which is led today by DC-based attorney Malik Zulu Shabazz, were one and the same organization, whereas these two organizations have no connection. Interestingly, however, they have stated in writing that Mr. Shabazz, a federal lawyer, is the leader of a criminal gang also, namely the NBPP. Many of the organizations that have used the Black Panther name, in fact, no longer exist, and have had very different ideologies, agendas, and views. Indeed, the NBPP is a quasi-religious group connected to the Nation of Islam, whose racial, political, and economic views the NABPP-WPO do not share. Fundamentally, this prison designated the NABPP-WPO a gang and STG before even knowing what our views and interests are, and subsequently have ignored them in order to preserve this false criminal profile. And using the generic, all-inclusive Black Panther designation, they systematically bar any and all information on any BP organization, past and present, from possession by any prisoner, although most Black history reference books and general encyclopedias have entries on the original Black Panther Party and its leaders. So, in essence, the policy here is to censor Black history while promoting the history and memory of white American figures and political leaders who exterminated Indians and enslaved, brutalized, and raped Blacks as an accepted political norm. Racial discrimination. But of course, this repression is not without precedent. The original BPP, which was founded in Oakland, California in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale and destroyed by the U.S. government, met with similar persecution. Indeed, its treatment by the U.S. government, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in particular, set the standard on official hatred and smear-mongering against groups bearing the BP name. The original BPP was founded as a legal, above-ground Black political party that promoted the rights of urban Blacks to defend their communities against crime and violence, and promoted community service programs to meet the economic needs of desperately poor urban Blacks that the government ignored, such as free breakfast programs for children. This was before food stamps and free school meals were widely available. In fact, the government expanded food stamps and school meals as counter to the Panthers' programs. Petition drives against police brutality, free schools, free health clinics, free clothing and shoe programs, free busing to prisons, free senior citizen service programs, free sickle cell anemia research and testing, free pest control, plumbing and maintenance, ambulance, daycare, and news service programs. Various surveys found the vast majority of the urban Black population supported the BPP. The BPP was so popular that similar BP formations sprang up in England, Israel, Bermuda, Australia, and India. It also aided in forming similar groups among whites, the White Panther Party and Young Patriot Party, the latter being a formation of Appalachian whites, the Mexicans, Brown Berets, Puerto Rico, Young Lords Party, and white college student groups, which it worked closely with as allies. As Todd Gitlin of the Students for a Democratic Society noted, quote, "At a time when most other Black groups donned dashikis and glowered at whites, they, Panthers, welcomed white allies," end quote. Eldridge Cleaver, the BPP's Minister of Information, pointed out, quote, "In reality, there is no such thing as a Black movement and a white movement in the United States. These are merely categories of thought that only have reality in terms of the lines that the ruling class itself has drawn and is implementing amongst the people. The United States is controlled by one ruling class," end quote. Solely because of its orientation toward uplifting and serving communities, the BPP was viciously slandered and attacked by the government. Violence-prone street gangs were incited by the FBI and police to attack and kill BPP leaders and members. Racial and anti-white stereotypes were played up via the media. Bogus letters were written by the FBI agents and sent to BPP members. The public, landlords, employers, spouses, supporters, religious leaders, etc., to play the Black community, Panthers, and other Black groups against each other. Assassination raids were conducted by FBI and police to murder Panthers. False arrests and prosecutions of Panthers were conducted to stigmatize them as criminally inclined and to harass them and deplete party funds and resources on defending members against false criminal charges, and much more. all orchestrated by the FBI's Covert Action Program, COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. The derogatory and violence-prone image of the BPP was solely the creation of a then openly racist and sexist FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover, and other agencies, at a period when blacks and women were refused employment with the FBI, and it was openly operating as an agency opposed to blacks and black communities. The conceitedly illegal and criminal methods used by the FBI against the BPP were exposed and denounced by the U.S. Congress in 1976, and several in-depth studies have been written on the FBI's anti-BPP and anti-black crusade. While the FBI claimed, in the face of its exposure in the 1970s, that it would end or limit future COINTELPROs, although it has not, the false images it portrayed of the BPP continue and live on in the white American public mind. Hence, the very mention of the name BP today evokes images of a gun-toting black version of the Ku Klux Klan. But let there be no mistake about it. The BPP was not an exception to the rule in the application of these methods against black political activists and leaders. As the Church Committee congressional investigations of U.S. intelligence agencies exposed, all black leaders and groups were targeted, even such groups and leaders as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Martin Luther King Jr., all under FBI labels of their being violence-prone, black nationalist hate groups. Just like the criminal gang label is thrown around today. As a recent in-depth expose by attorney William F. Pepper and a wrongful death lawsuit he successfully prosecuted on behalf of the King family in 1999 revealed, the FBI, in collaboration with other U.S. civil and military intelligence agencies, were King's actual killers. King's widow, the late Coretta Scott King, had this to say about Pepper's book. Quote, "For a quarter of a century, Bill Pepper conducted an independent investigation on the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. He opened his files to our family, encouraged us to speak with witnesses, and represented our family in the civil trial against the conspirators. The jury affirmed his findings, providing our family with a long-sought sense of closure and peace, which had been denied by official disinformation and cover-ups. Now, the findings of his exhaustive investigation and additional revelations from the trial are presented in the pages of this important book. We recommend it highly to everyone who seeks the truth about Dr. King's assassination." End quote. Yet today, the U.S. government pretends to respect the memory and work of this man that it murdered, with a national holiday. The object, then as today, is to destroy independent and influential black political leaders and replace them with ones approved by U.S. officials to mislead us. To continue the oppressive and steadily deteriorating conditions within and to divide the U.S. black communities. As the Church Committee report revealed, Assistant FBI Director William C. Sullivan promoted a COINTELPRO in which the FBI would handpick a, quote, new national leader, end quote, once King was eliminated. Sullivan's overall strategy, which he wrote in 1964, was to simultaneously destroy Dr. King, Malcolm X, and Elijah Muhammad. He wrote, quote, "When this is done, and it can and will be done, obviously much confusion will reign, particularly among the Negro people. The Negroes will be left without a national leader of sufficiently compelling personality to steer them in the proper direction." End quote. Sullivan recommended black corporate lawyer Samuel R. Pierce Jr. as King's replacement. Yesterday it was a corporate lawyer, today it is an ex-law professor, Barack Obama. We of course know that COINTELPRO is alive and well. The repressions I face are classic COINTELPRO methods. Also, 3 years ago, FBI Director Robert Mueller announced before a Senate subcommittee the implementation of a new Threat Assessment Program, TAPS. A modern COINTELPRO targeted specifically at U.S. prisoners who are politically active, under the cover, as always, of professing to prevent potential violence. The same self-serving rationale used to justify the ongoing persecution and ultimate murder of Dr. King, and targeting all other black political groups, leaders, and activists. TAPS involves the FBI, along with Homeland Security and other agencies, working in collaboration with various prisons and prison systems nationwide to identify, profile, disrupt, repress, and neutralize prisoner activists, groups, and individuals, being mindful that several influential black political leaders like Malcolm X and George Jackson developed inside of prison. I have been informed that I have been and am a target of TAPs. Methods that I have been targeted with include the following: frequent interception and destruction of my mail, systematic obstruction of all articles I write or artwork I create from coming into the prisons, obstructions of my ability to collaborate with outside editors and contacts to have my articles and a book I wrote published, blocking nearly all of my periodicals from reaching me, repeated targetings with trumped-up disciplinary reports, repeated indictments on trumped-up violent crimes that have been each dismissed in turn, the last one with prejudice where I conducted my defense pro se, abusive process, habitually disappearing my incoming mail or rejecting it as in violation of prison policy without explanation, barring my contacts with various attorneys who have attempted to assist me, rejecting, opening, and delaying my legal mail, even from the ACLU, outside my presence, hampering my contacts with the courts in anticipated and pending litigations, frequent destructions and thefts of my legal property which I have had to obtain court orders to have returned, barring my visitors and telephone use and blocking the telephone numbers of loved ones and others, targeting me with threats, attempts, and actual acts of violence by guards and their white supremacist inmate lackeys, etc. I should add that further conditions exist at this prison, and within this prison system, which are openly race-motivated and otherwise unlawful, e.g. the censorship of black and brown-oriented cultural, political, and historical publications as STG materials, while no such measures are applied to mainstream and white publications and media. Censorship of all media and publications that in any way critique U.S. government, prison, and economic policies and practices. Censorship of publications and media by or about grassroots black historical figures and leaders such as Huey P. Newton and Harry Haywood, while publications about racist, murderous, and criminally oppressive white historical figures like Adolf Hitler, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Christopher Columbus, etc., are stocked in the prison library and accessible to all prisoners. Promoting, protecting, and hiring of staff at the prison who are members and affiliates of white supremacist groups and gangs. Repression of prisoners who are documented members of actual black and brown street gangs, while officials protect and give free rein to members of white supremacist gangs and use them as hitmen against disliked prisoners of color, removing all television stations from the prison's closed-circuit television system that aired black programs. Harassing local radio stations and programs that play black music and allow call-ins to prisoners from friends, family, and supporters. Subjecting black and brown prisoners to the harshest and highest security levels and conditions, while maintaining white prisoners in minimum security with extensive privileges and benefits, making security level classifications along blatantly racial lines. Frequent targetings of black and brown prisoners with abuse, violence, denied meals, etc. Deliberately engineering and facilitating violent conflicts between and against prisoners of color, particularly between prisoners documented as members of rival black and brown street gangs, populating these remote prisons that are staffed nearly exclusively by rural whites with predominantly non-white prisoners, etc., etc. That the FBI and other intelligence and executive agencies are more racially diverse today than during the 1960s and 70s in no way invalidates their anti-black policies. Indeed, it was a black Chicago policeman, Gloves Davis, that shot two sleeping BPP leaders, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, in their heads at point-blank range in December 1969 in an FBI-orchestrated assassination raid. It was today's FBI that assassinated Puerto Rican grassroots leader Filiberto Ojeda Rios in September 2005, sparking protests across Puerto Rico, which spanned everyday civilians to government leaders. Also, the most brutal violence against South African blacks during openly racist apartheid was often carried out by black soldiers and police. We see black and brown police involved as viciously as white ones in unprovoked and unjustified violence and murders of urban youth of color today in America. Furthermore, the National Security Council, NSC, which is chaired by the U.S. President and whose enforcement arm is the CIA, implemented NSC Memorandum No. 46 in 1978, the stated goals of which were/are to ensure the permanent demise and destruction of the U.S. Black liberation and civil rights movements. In its own words, the NSC-46 devised to ensure that there would never evolve another independent black leader or organization that could unite the U.S. black population, to play white working class people against blacks, to divide the black community in political gangs, to bring more blacks into established political institutions so they could be controlled and used to mislead the black population, and to destroy all aspirations then prevailing among blacks to develop an independent black political party. So we see an overall historical continuum till today of targeting black leaders and activists for destruction who are not approved by the establishment, and deliberately maintaining the urban black communities in crisis. And the same old tactics are being used. Officials at this prison have conceded working with the FBI and DHS in intelligence sharing, government speak for interagency repressive covert actions against targeted individuals and groups. Of course, none of what I've touched on herein related to the history and designs of this country's intelligence and policing agencies is unknown to the various recipients of this letter. It's your MO and SOP. It's the general public that's kept oblivious of it. Moreover, I've only skimmed the surface, just enough to place my issues in their proper context, and to satisfy my burden of placing each of you on notice of my issues before pursuing redress in other forms, and to afford you the opportunity to address/redress these matters. I am therefore presenting this letter of complaint to all named agencies and officials, requesting that such racially and politically motivated persecution and abuses cease, that the false gang/STG profiling of me and the NABPP WPO at this prison and anywhere else be rescinded with an apology for this defamation, and that all the illegal, discriminatory, and retaliatory treatments and conditions mentioned herein be abolished. If I hear nothing from you all within 20 days, I will proceed to seek both public and judicial exposure and redress of these and other practices against those officials hereby notified, via copy of this letter. Sincerely, Kevin Rashid Johnson, number 185492.